All right, let's go back here. Just let me put a post. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. Time for a little bit of a meeting here. I hope you all had a good spring break. Now we're kind of in our last few weeks and rolling down to where we need to be. All right, so a couple things you need to know. First and foremost, let me close this out, and I will post the Nearpod link on the side here. Clicky, and that way you can actually go ahead and follow me on the Nearpod that we're doing today. I'll be doing it live, as you know, just like always. Next thing you need to know regarding grades. Here's what I learned from our meeting with Mr. Bradford. One, we will be letting you catch up with any missing work from quarter three. So you'll be able to do that quarter three work, and we will go ahead and put it in and grade it like normal. And whatever grade you get for quarter three, we're going to double it for quarter four. Secondly, and I did have this question from Miss Lopez, sent me, I think Saturday night, maybe I got it yesterday, but I wanted to know what was going to happen with all these enrichment activities and such that we're doing on here. And the answer is that is going to be done for bonus. So if you are one of my students who had over 100%, because I know I had, especially in my eighth hour is really rocking and rolling. I had about 4 students who had over 100%. Shout out to Tagadeen and Muhammad. Those are the two that come to mind real right then and there. I think Levante also had one over 100%. You guys are rocking and rolling. You're good to go. So that's how that is. Naturally, I do want you to go ahead and do these other enrichments and go ahead if you want to pop your grade up from there. But that's what's really going to be happening is that these enrichment activities are going to be, done as bonus assignments. So if you had, let's say your grade was a D. Well, if you've been doing these enrichments and logging in and doing all these assignments from the, whether it was the city planning project, urban planning project, or any of the videos I've done on Edpuzzle, then congratulations, you get bonus. You can work that C up to an A. So that works in your favor. Beyond that, we're going to go ahead and get started today. And today's focus is going to be on more development, but specifically we're going to be looking at energy and what it means to have energy development. So you can go ahead and log in right there, nearpod.com. I'm going to turn on my Nearpod. I don't know why it didn't want to work for me a second ago. All right, let's log in. I have already posted all this to Google Classroom, so it's on there waiting for you as well as a Spanish translation, which I went ahead and uploaded for that one. So let's do live lesson, and I'll open it up. All right, so today our focus is looking at energy and how energy and energy sources can aid in development of a society. So your bell ringer, I want you to think about energy a little bit. Think about your average energy use. What things do you use energy for? Be specific. And number two is, where does the energy you use come from? And have you ever thought about it before? For a number of students who are in my class, I would hope that you've thought about their energy before, especially all those times I've caught people plugging in cell phones to charge into their Chromebooks to charge a cell phone. Ladies and gentlemen, energy is not something it's not infinite. So if you're plugging your phone into your Chromebook to charge it, I'm sorry to tell you this, I've told a number of people this one already, but they don't seem to care, is that you're actually drawing from the battery in the Chromebook. There's no mystical, magical source of energy that's going to keep your Chromebook going the entire time and giving energy to your cell phone. It's going to be stealing it out of there. Needless to say, my first year at Broadmoor was last year, 2018, 2019. I was doing civics. I had people who really could not figure out why their Chromebook was shutting down and just completely dead by the time they got to their last class. As it turned out, what it was is they spent the entire day plugging their cell phone into it and seeping like a vampire, sucking the energy out of it to power their cell phone. Not a smart move, especially if you have a test. And we're going to be trying in the future to actually get away from all the paper tests as much as possible. So keep that in consideration. Always have to learn to pace yourself, not have to have the cell phone at all times. A lot of people have trouble with that one. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward once you answer that one. All devices. Energy. The universe we know is one of dynamic forces. Its heartbeat sending a constant flow of energy coursing through the vastness of time and space. This energy is never destroyed, nor is it creative, nor is it created. But we are perceiving this energy in many different forms. And there's a little bit of a song there. If you want to listen to it, you're more than welcome to. I'm not going to make you do it. I'm not going to play it on here because the YouTube gods have decreed that copyrighted music is a no-no, and I'll be banned from it. Yay. So our first course of action is to look at how much demand we have for energy. As you know, we get energy from raw materials, basic materials from where these products are made. Now, for energy production, our three big basics, our three big raw materials for most energy production in the world are coal, petroleum, aka oil, and natural gas. I'm not sure if y'all were paying attention yesterday, but yesterday actually marked the 10th anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. As you know, there was an explosion, killed a number of people on this oil rig, and it proceeded to dump millions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. And while the Gulf of Mexico is still healing, we are seeing some negative side effects. For one, there's actually higher rates of certain cancers and diseases in dolphins around Barataria Bay, as well as a number of fish have been tested. And we estimate that every fish in the Gulf of Mexico has some sort of oil consumption that's still inside their bodies over all this time. So there are some downsides to it. But our big three: coal, petroleum, natural gas. So our demand is so high, and the question is, why is our demand so high? Fact of the matter is that as a country develops, it's going to need more and more energy for its people. So more developed countries, these MDCs like the United States, Canada, most of Europe, they're going to have more than half of all energy produced in the world is consumed by those countries. Reason why is it goes into housing. That energy goes for businesses. That energy goes for transportation. Now, the thing is, with those more developed countries needing this energy, where are they getting it from? A lot of times they look at less developed countries. Places, especially the Middle East. Those less developed countries in the Middle East are going to have the majority of the resources. Excuse me, I had a spot of heartburn here. So because these energy resources are not distributed equally across these less developed countries, we tend to see a little bit of political instability going on there. As in, who is going to control these resources? So on your screen, I've got a map of Saudi Arabia. And in these places in green and red, we've got energy pipelines, oil and natural gas pipelines. We also have areas where there's refineries. You'll see towards the center right, you'll see a black square with a white icon in it. That's an oil barrel. It's an oil barrel. And that is a site where there's a major production facility where they refine this oil, crude oil, into different fuels and then ship it out. So naturally, we're seeing where these big countries, countries that produce a lot of big natural resources, especially oil and coal, are actually using that. And you're seeing a small group of people, the small elite group of people, actually kind of keep it for themselves, and they're making all the profit of it, while the rest of the country goes, without. So there tends to be some political instability. In the case of Saudi Arabia, there's actually a Saudi royal family, and they actually control political life across Saudi Arabia. There's not so much in the way of governors or regional, but it's typically run by this one family. All right, let's move forward. So this is, as of 2009, oil consumption around the world. The bigger your dot is, the more oil you consume on a daily basis. So this is, once again, this is a little bit out of date. It's over a decade old. I'd like to see what the results are now. I'll have to see if I can find it. How many thousands of barrels of oil every day? The United States leads the pack, 18,686,000. So essentially 18 million barrels of oil every day being used. China has about over 8.6 million. The United Kingdom, smaller country, smaller population, has a lot smaller. But the United States is the top dog on the block here. I'm going to see if I can find some more updated information about where we are now in the year 2020 or maybe 2019 to see if we've actually dropped any and do a comparison. Because I'm fairly certain that China in the past 10 years has definitely grown up. Maybe it's not at the same 18,000 point as the United States, but they're definitely a little bit higher than they were 10 years ago. So here's your first question. What are some ways that energy directly affects the global economy? So I'm seeing that no one's in right now, but go ahead and think about it. Go ahead and type your answer in or speak your answer since there is the audio version now. And we'll go forward. So our first question is, where do these fossil fuels come from? And the answer is it comes from dead plants. So coal is usually found in places that used to be tropical. There's a lot of plants around, and as a result, when those plants died, they'd be buried under layer and layer, and eventually as they decompose, they would actually turn into coal. We see this a lot in the United States, especially places with major coal mines like West Virginia, parts of Pennsylvania have a lot of coal mines there. Also, there's a lot of coal in China. In fact, China makes one of the reasons why we have such a major pollution issue in the world today is that China actually spends most of its time burning coal to create electricity. In fact, ever since China shut down a lot of things for the COVID-19 outbreak, we've actually been seeing there's a lot of clearer air in China because there's not all that stuff going into the air there. Petroleum, we actually get from aquatic plant life, as well as ocean residue. 10 million years ago, a fish dies and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Well, lo and behold, more fish die. You have some plants sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And as that happens, it builds up. And underneath the ocean, we actually see it's being pressurized in the Earth's crust. And that pressurization turns that coal into oil, makes it liquidy. And then lastly, we have natural gas. It's another thing. It kind of comes from both these areas. Natural gas is a natural byproduct. It's essentially very, very flammable methane and breaks off as it forms in conjunction with the coal and the oil. If you've ever heard of swamp gas, or if you've ever been to an area, let's say you're paddling along the swamp or a lake or something, and you actually see kind of these bubbles springing up from the bottom, those bubbles are typically natural gas. So here's a brief video. I'm going to go ahead and play it. 2 minutes. Here we go. And by the way, this guy is actually in a place I kind of recognize. I think I recognize some of these places here. It's in Barataria Bay, south of New Orleans. And I think I've been to this place he's at. Because a lot of this, I know a lot of people say that, but it does look rather familiar to me. So this is in Louisiana. So go ahead and click play. And now.
So why are fossil fuels a powerful but ultimately problematic source of energy? Conditions on the waterways of today's Louisiana help us understand how fossil fuels are made and why they're ultimately unsustainable. Oil, coal, and natural gas are made from things, mostly plants, that lived and died long ago. It's taken hundreds of millions of years for nature to create enough of the special conditions that save the carbon and energy in plants to form the fossil fuels that we use. Here's how it works. Plants, like these tiny diatoms encased in silica shells, grow in the upper layers of lakes and oceans, using the sun's energy to turn carbon dioxide and water into more plants. When they die, if they're buried where there's little oxygen to break them down, their chemical bonds retain the energy that began as sunlight. If enough carbon-rich matter is buried deeply enough, for long enough, the Earth's heat and pressure turn it into fossil fuel, concentrating the energy that once fed the growing plants. Vary what goes into Earth's pressure cooker, and you end up with the different kinds of fossil fuel. Woody plants make coal. Slimy plants, algae, will give you oil, and both of them give rise to natural gas. The fossil fuels formed over a few 100 million years, and we're burning them over a few 100 years. And if we keep doing that, sooner or later, they must run out. There's a bigger problem with fossil fuels. As we've seen, they're made of carbon primarily. When you burn them, add oxygen, and that makes CO2 that goes in the air. We're reversing the process by which they formed. And if we keep doing this, it must change the composition of Earth's atmosphere.
All right, let's move forward. So once again, we're going to hit these next key things here. One is that development takes money. As you know, the World Bank loans money to developing countries to help with their infrastructure. The International Monetary Fund loans money to stabilize a country's economy. And we already know what some problems are, because maybe in some cases that there's faulty engineering. The infrastructure fails to attract other investments. Maybe there's corruption, the government misusing or stealing the money. Now, in this case, we actually see a lot of people flocking to these less developed countries, because in those cases, if they have these different types of fossil fuels, we see it as, hey, you know what? They're open for business. We can actually do business with the country to buy the oil or buy the coal from them, so we don't have to do it ourselves in our backyard. We actually see this a lot with Venezuela. And until the socialists took over Venezuela, there was actually a lot of investment in Venezuelan oil resources. Venezuela is one of the OPEC countries, and they were one of the top economies in South America up until the rise of the socialist government. And I'm not talking about Bernie Sanders' version of socialism here. I'm talking about total socialism, where the government essentially takes over everything and then puts their own people in charge of it. Case in point, the Exxon company was working in Venezuela. Venezuela kicked them out. Exxon was doing great. They were producing a lot of oil and selling it, and Venezuela was getting the tax revenue from that. Unfortunately, when the Venezuelans, the socialists, took over, they kick out Exxon and they take over the Exxon plant, and they're producing it by the government. But what happened was there was no oversight for the government. And you had the leader of Venezuela, used to be Hugo Chavez, now it's Maduro, I believe. What he did was he took over this company and then put his friends in charge, people he knew, cronies who didn't know what they were doing. They had no experience with the oil industry. And as a result, the economy of Venezuela tanked. And that's why, even though they're still a member of OPEC today, there's a lot of mass starvation going on, a lot of political upheaval trying to get Nicolas Maduro out of Venezuela. And once again, the Brent line comes into play again. The rich North versus the poor South. Rich North is essentially more developed countries. The poor South is going to be less developed countries. Once again, this was developed in the 1980s, and since then we've had a lot of changes. We've actually seen other countries in the South actually become more developed, and now they are a little bit more rich than and be able to stand on par with the northern countries. For example, China is a big one. In this map, they cut out China and they say they're part of the poor South. Well, if you've been watching what Beijing and Shanghai in China, those two cities over the past 30 years, they have grown from being just small cities into major megalopolises, just crazy metropolis cities. And so this map is really rather outdated. That Brent line doesn't really work. A lot of people think that's no longer useful. And I tend to be one of those people just because of what China's been doing. And a lot of stuff going on in South Africa, especially since when this was drawn, apartheid and legal segregation was the norm in South Africa. But now things have actually been moving along quite nicely. Apartheid ended in 1992, 93, I believe. And things have actually been developing. South Africa, we've seen Brazil has also been developing. They're not, while there are some very, very poor people, as we saw with the favelas, in Brazil, we actually see a higher standard of living overall. It's been rising. It hasn't risen by much, but it has risen. So things are developing. All right, so energy supplies. As mentioned in that video we just watched, our dependency on fossil fuels has made them ultimately unsustainable. As more countries develop, there's more demand for energy, and it's unfortunately outpacing the supply. Eventually, if we're not careful, we will run out. So what are some ways we cope with this? Well, we look at renewables. Try to find renewable energy sources. Things like hydroelectric power, getting energy from moving water. On the screen, you're seeing a GIF image of a hydroelectric power plant. You've got a dam. The water flows through the dam, down through it, and that water goes into a turbine. And the force of the water and gravity turns that turbine, and that's what actually causes you to have electrical generation. It turns the turbine, moves a generator, and creates electricity. However, there are some problems with these. If you want to have renewable resources like hydroelectric, you have to build these dams. And when you build these dams, you end up flooding large areas. If y'all are taking U.S. history with, say, either Mr. Mabry or Mr. Waldrop, you'll know about the Tennessee Valley Authority. In order to put people to work in Tennessee, they started building dams along a lot of these rivers. And what happened was these low-lying areas in front of the dam actually ended up being flooded out. So you do have loss of some land because of it. You also have the loss of houses. People have to move, puts them out. So you do have to end up flooding certain areas. If any of you have ever been to Toledo Bend, it's on the Sabine River between Louisiana and Texas. That is not a natural lake. That was a reservoir that was created when they decided to build a power plant at the bottom. They built the dam on the Sabine River. And what happened was, on the other side of that dam, all this water flooded. All of that area, that flow, it hit that dam, it hit a spot where it had to stop, and it just flooded the area. So Toledo Bend Reservoir is not a natural lake. In fact, if you have a good enough sonar, and you go out there in the river with a boat and a good enough sonar, you'll actually be able to see the roads that are at the bottom of this area that were all flooded out when they built the dam. Our next renewable, and one of my personal favorites, is solar. Harvesting energy from the sun. In fact, in a lot of places in developing countries or less developed countries in Africa, places like Uganda and Namibia, you're actually seeing a lot of people promoting solar panels. In fact, it's not hard to find certain villages where the village might not have a lot of infrastructure, but all the houses in the village will actually be covered with solar panels, as in the case in this video you're seeing here. However, there are some issues with solar, is that solar tends to be expensive. And also, you need to have a better battery to store solar energy for a longer time. In the case of myself, I'm going to use myself as an example here. I'm in the process of trying to build a house, and I am looking at putting solar panels on it because I'm not married. I don't have kids. I don't have a much call for electricity. In fact, I don't really use a lot of electricity myself. But in the United States, if I wanted to do that, the first thing I have to do is have a capacitor in the house, and probably in the utility room. And that capacitor essentially acts as the house's battery. And the solar panel, you think about solar panels and how, the sun heats up these panels and the panels just provide the energy. That's only part of the equation. If you don't have that capacitor, you're not going to be able to run that energy for very long. I'm sure you've all been to Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot and you saw those solar lights that go into like driveway lights, or if you have like a footpath in your yard, decorative things. Those don't last very long. You can actually have this little tiny solar panel. It charges all day, and when the sun goes down, the light comes on, but the light can only stay on for maybe about 2 or 3 hours with one little light. There's no capacitor to it. You just have there is a small battery in there that works on it, but you're not going to be able to run a lot of major things on it. So your house has to have a similar thing. It has to have that battery. And essentially during the day, your battery charges, and then you have energy for the rest of the day after that. Works for me because, hey, I'm a teacher. From 6 a.m. until at least 4 p.m., I'm not at home. So my house, that battery can charge all day. And then I'll have enough power that when I can go home and do what I need to do, and then let it all happen again the next day. And there's a brief video here. I'll go ahead and play it.
Africans have been waiting for decades for the mains electricity, which the rich world takes for granted. Sub-Saharan Africa's 910 million people consume less electricity each year than the 4.8 million people of Alabama. Many more who are on the grid suffer brownouts and dangerous surges in current. But a solar revolution is afoot. In 2009, just 1% of sub-Saharan Africans used solar lighting. Now it is nearly 5%, or 11 million people. The International Energy Agency, a Paris-based government think tank, reckons that 500 million more people will have solar electricity by 2030. Why is solar power spreading so fast in Africa? There are three main reasons. First, solar panel technology has improved. Efficiency gains and mass production mean that modern photovoltaic panels have plunged in price per watt to around 30 cents. Second, low energy bulbs have got better and cheaper. Modern solar lamps cost as little as $8. They charge by day and give light by night. They replace costly and dangerous alternatives. Africans waste $10 billion a year on kerosene. Even worse are candles, open fires, or darkness, which hurts productivity and encourages crime. The third crucial development is in storage, as lamps are needed at night and solar power is collected in the daytime. Old nickel-cadmium batteries wore out after 500 recharges. Lithium-based ones can manage 2,000 and store much more electricity. Additionally, solar power is increasingly well-financed in Africa. Aid donors are sponsoring more ambitious projects, specially designed fridges and televisions, for example. Bigger solar systems can run a school or clinic, a grain mill or irrigation pump, or even a whole village. Some dismiss solar as a second-best solution, but conventional centralized electrical grids have proved unreliable and inefficient in the past, and solar is much better than nothing.
All right, let's move forward. Wind. Harvesting energy from moving air. The wind blows, it turns the blades of these windmills, and those blades will actually turn the turbines, which turn the generators. However, there are a few problems. One, that wind is not consistent. You might have a really windy day one day, but the winds might die down the next day. Secondly, as you can tell from that picture, you need a lot of windmills to produce enough energy for everyone. And thirdly, there are environmental issues. Strangely enough, one of the groups that have come out with it against windmills are people in a lot of environmental groups, especially people who do deal with endangered species. Because guess what happens? Birds have a tendency to get killed. Migratory birds get hit by these windmill blades, and they die. Also, these things aren't exactly very attractive. There was actually an idea floated to build a number of these windmills off the coast in Massachusetts. And unfortunately, a lot of people who lived in Massachusetts along the coast there decided to complain because they were not interesting, not appealing to look at. And as a result, what would happen was they thought their property values would go down. So they came out against it, strangely enough. Next up, biomass. When you get fuel from biological stuff, oils, fats, poop, whether it's animal or otherwise, you've probably heard of biodiesel, where you can actually take used cooking oil from different restaurants like McDonald's and such, and you can filter it over and over again until it's almost pure oil, no French fry particles, and then you can actually produce that into fuel, diesel, which a lot of diesel trucks can actually run on. So biomass, getting fuel from biological things, and there's a quick little video here. I'm not going to play the entire thing. It's about a 5-minute video. And in that one, it actually talks about how they actually go from cooking oil, used oil from, say, McDonald's, and they turn it into fuel, diesel. So even though fossil fuels are cheaper, what are some ways that alternative energy could benefit developing countries, especially those in sub-Saharan Africa? Go ahead and think about your answer, submit it, or say it. You can do either or. I've got both turned on, and we'll move forward once you're done. So our goal here, as everyone is developing, is to get into what we call sustainable development. Economic and social development that's conducted without a major depletion of natural resources. And you kind of have to hit this perfect trifecta to get into sustainable development. You actually have to have your development being economic. It can be good for the economy. It can be social. In other words, good for nurturing the community, the people around it. And then you also have to get environmental. So once you have all three of those, you hit that sweet spot right in the center, and you have sustainable development. Good for the economy, good for the environment, and good for the community. So what are some ways you might think about when it comes to sustainable development? All right, ladies and gentlemen, next up, time to climb. Let's think about what the things that you've been looking at over the past couple days. Past couple lessons. I'm going to do Himalayas. Waiting for players. Currently, I don't have anyone logged in. Oh, well. I have 3 people watching. Yay. All right, so time to climb. Nearpod has actually changed this around, so you guys will be able to do time to climb against each other. And you can leave your marks on the mountain there, and you'll see where everyone else has come in. And that's going to be available now onto the student pace version. All right, and lastly, your exit tickets. So I want you to, it's kind of practice for your exit ticket. And the question is, sustainable development is a policy enacted by many municipalities in recent decades. However, sustainable development comes at a social and economic cost. 1, I want you to define sustainable development. 2, describe one way in which a city can use sustainable development to attract citizens. 3, I want you to explain how the concept of sustainable development relates to a specific industry. Maybe it's coal, maybe it's natural gas. And 4, I want you to describe sustainable development when it comes to energy production. All right, guys. So that is your exit ticket. I've got it up there now. I want you to kind of do some thinking, maybe do a little bit of research. If you use anything outside of my notes to answer this one, let me know where you found it. Now, a couple things. 1, as you know, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, I do the live stream, and I also do the Nearpod. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I have virtual office hours. I'm going to be setting up a not YouTube. It's called Microsoft Teams. I'm going to send that invitation out on Google Classroom. And with that one, from 9 a.m. until 11 a.m., I'll be on Microsoft Teams. And if you have any questions to ask, let me know, and I will get you the answers as best I can. If not, I will get you in touch with someone who can. Either most likely going to be one of your other teachers or possibly Mr. Sampson. So once again, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, live stream plus Nearpod. Tuesdays and Thursdays, my office hours are from 9 a.m. until 11 a.m. All right, until then, have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you guys later. Does anyone here have any questions? My one person on there. Who is that? Is that Nam? Namvo, is that you? Yeah. All right. Well, in any case, go ahead and have a good day, and I'll see you guys later.